Welcome. Good evening, everyone. I'm Louise Bradshaw. I'm the Director of Education here at the St. Louis Zoo. And it's my pleasure to welcome you guys to the St. Louis Zoo for this fabulous lecture. But first, I'm going to do a little demonstration. Everybody know what this is? You probably have something similar in your pocket. So let's see. I have to press. This one's a little complicated. All right, turn power off. Yes, I really mean it. I turn my cell phone off. So if you don't mind, or to vibrate, we would appreciate it. So again, I want to thank you all for coming. I have a couple of pieces of information to share with you. First of all, I want to also let you know that this series, this our science seminar series, and also our conservation conversation series that we have here at the St. Louis Zoo are sponsored this year through the generosity of Cooper Busman. Cooper Busman's a local company. We're very, very, very grateful for their help and support to bring excellent talks about science and conservation to you at no charge. How cool is that? So we're very, very excited and very pleased. Secondly, I just want to also draw your attention to the last in our series of conservation conversations here at the zoo that will be on April 10th. The talk will be the reintroduction of the island fox. This is about the Channel Island foxes off the coast of California. And the St. Louis Zoo's very own Dr. Cheryl Asa, who's our director of research, who's been working on this project, reintroducing the Channel Island foxes for, golly, well over 20 years, I think. And, you know, a lot of times when we're talking conservation, it's all about issues and problems and challenges, and at times it can seem a little daunting, right? Yeah. This is an incredible success story. So if you want a really rousing good news, you want a really great story to keep in your hip pocket that has some intrigue, drama, some really neat interdisciplinary, using a variety of people from different disciplines to help with this, that's a really good one. So I hope to see you there. And then I just also want to draw your attention out. We have tables out front, and we were hoping to have copies of Dr. Halfpenny's books here for you to purchase and sign and so forth. Well, UPS didn't quite, they still haven't arrived. And so out front, there are some order forms on the tables if you're interested. If we run out, I'll make sure to stand out there after the lecture and, you know, help get you information if you're interested in ordering his books. I will say, personally, I have several of them personally, and they're delightful. They're really wonderful. So now what I'd like to do is introduce my colleague, Rose Jansen from the Academy of Science of St. Louis. She's going to tell you a little bit more about the Academy's programs, and then introduce Dr. Halfpenny, tonight's speaker. And I just have to say something. I was very privileged to go with Jim and a zoo group, some of folks who were here tonight, last May. And we got to see the Grizzly Bears right as they were emerging from hibernation. And it was one of the most amazing experiences I've ever had in the wild. Thank you very much, Jim. Rose.
Well, good evening. My name is Rose Jansen. As Louise said, I'm with the Academy of Science St. Louis, and we are very pleased to be partnering with the St. Louis Zoo and the University of Missouri St. Louis Department of Continuing Ed to bring you the final 2011-2012 Science Seminar Series talk, Bears of North America. Science Seminar Series and Conservation Conversations, as Louise said, are generously underwritten by Cooper Busman. Many of you are Academy members and friends. For those of you who are not, I'm going to take just a moment to tell you a little bit about who we are. We're an independent science organization. We're supported entirely through community contributions. We've been connecting science in the community since 1856, so for a very long time. We have a long-standing mission to advance the public understanding of science and inspire the next generation of scientists and science advocates. We continue to celebrate more than 150 years of community service by offering a very broad range of free and low-cost public science programming, collaborative seminar series, and trips and tours that highlight science at venues throughout the region. And you can find more information on us on our website at academyofsciencestl.org, or feel free to visit us on Facebook or Twitter, or pick up some of the literature that is at the visitor's desk just outside the auditorium this evening. And if you'd like to receive e-notification of upcoming Academy and St. Louis Zoo public lectures and events, there will be some e-news sign-up sheets that will make their way around the audience tonight. I do want to mention an event on Thursday evening that you might have an interest in attending. This Thursday, March 29 at 7 p.m., and in partnership with the Missouri History Museum and the museum's Lee Auditorium, Associate Professor of Italian and Women, Gender and Sexuality Studies at Washington University, Dr. Rebecca Messbarger, talks about her book, The Lady Anatomist, The Life and Work of Anna Morandi Manzolini. Anna Manzolini was a woman artist and scientist of meager origins and limited formal education. She went on to become one of the most acclaimed anatomical sculptors of the Enlightenment. The lecture and book signing is free and open to the public, and you do not need to register to attend. And then, as Louise mentioned, of course, on April 10 at 7:30 here in the Living World Auditorium, we have Academy Fellow and 2009 Outstanding St. Louis Scientist Award recipient, Dr. Cheryl Asa, who is the zoo's Director of Research. She will be here to talk about the reintroduction of the island fox. And again, you can find more information on these and other upcoming science programs on our website at academyofscience.stl.org. So with that said, I'd like to introduce tonight's speaker, but without first, again, thanking the University of Missouri St. Louis Department of Continuing Ed, and in particular, Jim Jordan, who is with the Department of Continuing Ed. He is actually the person who is responsible for bringing Jim Halfpenny to St. Louis. Dr. James Halfpenny earned his BS and MS in botany and ecology from the University of Wyoming and his Ph.D. in biology, ecology, and mammalogy from the University of Colorado. He is an educator, scientist, author, ecologist, mammologist, and noted animal tracker, and is president of a Naturalist World, an ecological education company based in Gardner, Montana. Past research fellow of the Institute of Arctic and Alpine Research, Dr. Halfpenny was director of the Mountain Research Station and the long-term ecological research program in the Alpine. He has written more than 25 books and videos, including his latest, Yellowstone Bears in the Wild, and Trek Plates for Mammals. He led the American East Greenland expeditions in 1975 and 76, and is an Explorers Club Fellow and recipient of the club's Antarctic Service Medal. Jim is past chairman of the board of directors, senior instructor, and administrative liaison officer of the National Outdoor Leadership School. His work has taken him to all 7 continents. He has searched for dinosaur tracks in Colorado and Montana, followed iguanas in Ecuador, hiked seal trails in Antarctica, trailed wildlife in Tanzania, studied endangered species in China, tracked down bears and raccoon dogs in Japan, chased kangaroo tracks in Australia, and researched the polar bears of Hudson Bay and Greenland. So if you're here with us tonight, you've come to the right place for adventure and information. Jim's greatest academic love, bears, led to 20 years studying black, grizzly, and polar bears, and he is here with us tonight to talk about bears of North America. Won't you please join me in welcoming Dr. James Halfpenny.
Testing. We got volume? Okay. Well, thank you very much to the folks who made it possible. I came in Thursday night, and we've been looking over Friday, Saturday, Sunday, Monday, and I guess this Tuesday at cougars, bears, and wolves. And a lot of folks made that possible for happening, thanks to Louise and the zoo, Rose and the Academy of Science, Jim Jordan and the University of St. Louis, University of Missouri at St. Louis, the Junior Academy of Science, who's going to have a group of students coming out this summer to my neck of the woods, the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. A lot of people have made it possible. The Montana Department of Conservation, too, we ought to mention them and their programs we put on out there on Saturday and Sunday. So thank you to a lot of folks for making it possible. Tonight, I thought we would, for a bit, just share some time with the bears. Now, news break, news break, news break. Special investigation tonight going on, and I use a host of field reporters out there. I get to be up here and talking, but what you're going to see tonight wouldn't be possible without these folks that you see up there, my field reporters who have very generously donated video and photographs that you'll see in here. Some of that's my video and photographs also. But tonight, we're going to deal with the magic of bears. And there is a magic with bears, and it's hard to explain where this magic of bears comes from. We're going to have ourselves a little bit of fun with the bear tonight. We might even share a story or two about the bears. as we go through the evening. Now, what is this magic of bears? It's something that one doesn't easily put into words, but I'm going to try to share it with you as best I can, as if you were with me in the field. There is a certain fascination with bears, and that fascination's been around forever. Back in the days of the marshmallow bears in Yellowstone, where people fed them from their cars, and they were all over coming up on the steps of Roosevelt Lodge, if you know it. Clear up to today, there's the people with the bear coming on in on it. There is a magic of bears that brings us close, and that magic deals with the fascination we find in them. Now, what's fascinating about them? Well, they're kind of like us. They walk upright, just as I'm walking upright, is one of the things that might catch your fancy with the bears. And if we look at the bears, let's get that hand out of there maybe. We are not the only creature that stands on our hind legs and walks, as do the bears, to get a better look around the countryside. And this Yellowstone grizzly, also, she's trying to see what's going on over behind the sagebrush. One of the things then that strikes her fancy might just be that the bears are enough like us that they can walk upright. They also compete with people. And for some folks, this might be competing with the animals they hunt. This, for other folks, might be competing with the animals that we fish for. There's definitely a competition with humans. And we go down to the stream, and there's the bear coming in and looking for one of those fish that would make any fisherman proud to have. Brown bear of Alaska, and has just pulled out a salmon from the water. Now, you can't eat in the water, especially if you're swimming in the water, so you got to go to shore, have a spot where you can lay your fish down to dine on the fish. Perhaps our fascination with the bear deals with the fact they are big. And this is my lady Diane up against an 11-foot tall silhouette cutout of a polar bear. But let's just think for a second, how big are these bears? Imagine what you'd do if this fella was coming towards you. Or this one came running up to you. Not interested in me, he's actually going after the fish in the stream that are right next to me. Or perhaps, what if we have a polar bear next to a vehicle, and that polar bear stands up and up and up and up and up and up and keeps coming? Bears catch our fascination for the fact that they are big. But the other side of that coin is bears are cute and cuddly. Now, who couldn't fall in love with a little pair of black bear cubs like this? Cubs of the year, they're only about 5 months old when that picture's taken. And here's a cub of the year grizzly bear. And you can just see the thought process going on. Mom, don't leave now. I've never seen a human before. Mom, Mom, come on. Please, one more look, Mom. I just got to see what those humans are. What are those, Mom? Come on, Mom. We don't have to leave now, do we, Mom? Let's just look one more time, Mom. You know, those things are so interesting back there. They're up on two legs, just like us. They're kind of like naked bears. Or how about playing with your foot? Cute and cuddly. Or this bear is about 11 months old, and it's found its first swing set. How do you work this? What's it supposed to do here? Whoop. Definitely, that fascination with bears must deal a bit with the fact they are so cute and cuddly. The fascination with bears also comes from the fact that, like humans, they seem to play and have a good time. You give them any sort of a toy out there, like a stick, and it'll fascinate them and keep them busy for a long, long time. Now, this bear found an old discarded baseball cap, and it was like he was saying to himself, you know, I've seen these people put this thing on before. How do I put this cap on? You got to get it on your head somehow here. Whoops! And if you can't find a hat to play with, well, then how about just a good old-fashioned back scratch out there in the snow in the spring after you come out of hibernation? And then we could have just a wrestling match. Now, these wrestling matches help the bears to learn to size up the other victim out there. And I say victim because when it's the mating season or fighting for food out on the ice, some of these fights may be even fatal to the bears. So in the play wrestling bouts, you learn how big of a bear you should fight with. 1, 2, 3, 4 steps out there. And bears will play with dogs in many situations. Now think for a minute. In the dark of the Arctic night, you're crossing the polar basin and you're a polar bear. Your only companion is a dog. We call it an Arctic fox. But they seem to recognize the dogs and are willing, some of the bears, to play with them. And this dog's certainly playing. You see what his tail's doing. I've encountered this in 3 spots across the Arctic through the years. And the bears definitely like the play, but the dogs, some of them don't, and they'll tell the bears about it. Now, I work at a research center with my students up in the Arctic, and at this research center, we just completed our 22nd year of educational bear programs up there. And looking out the window at the research center one night, I spotted a little nose coming up to the window. This is my bedroom. Now, those are 1/2-inch rebars over the windows. Now, this bear is not aggressive. He's not mean or anything. He's curious. You know, most of his life it's dark. This is the dark season, and there's light in there, and there's movement in there, and there's people there. So he's curious about what's happening. And here's another powerful bear, although he's not a very big bear. I could have run him off, but I thought the footage was more fun than saving Yamaha's snowmobile. And if you watch him here in a moment, he's going to take a bite out of the seat. And then he tries to spit out the foam. But as he tries to spit out the foam, it expands. And he has to use his tongue to kick it out of his mouth. Watch, it'll come up here in a second. There it is. You see that little double movement to get the foam outside its mouth. So big is not necessarily powerful, because you can be powerful when you are also small, like that little one. And bears have a pride. Now, this pair of wrestling bears right here, the bigger one's on your right as you view the scene, and the little one, well, the little one's doing a good job backing him up, and whoa! I'm sorry, I said on the right-hand side of your screen, and that was on the left as you're visualizing it. Let's watch this one more time. Now, what happened here is the bear that goes down was embarrassed, and he crawled over in the willows, and he hid in the willows till it got dark, and we left. The bigger bear, whomp. Well, part of our fascination probably with bears deals with the fact that they are very endearing mothers. They're very concerning, they're very protective of their youngsters, and they're very tolerant of the little baby bears. This mom's fishing for the youngsters. I watched her all day long. She'd been fishing. She'd bring it ashore. The babies would grab the fish and eat it and move on. And then she would go get another fish, bring it ashore. The babies would eat it and go on. Well, finally, the babies went over and laid down. Looked like they've gone to sleep. So mom's finally going to get a little bit of supper herself. And here she comes out with a salmon. She'll just walk over and find a private. Whoops, wait a minute. Here comes that baby again. And pretty soon, it's up there looking for food, and that brings the next cub. And so the tug of war starts. Now, as a mom, you got to have a little force here and do the tug of war to teach your youngsters to be powerful and strong. But you also want kind of some of your supper. Oh, there went part of the supper. You want some of the supper yourself. But should she deny the cub that fish or not? Uh-oh, tug of war. Oh, and all that's left is to lick the scraps off the sand. Well, mothers are very protective of their cubs. They have to provide protection under, again, a myriad of different situations. And I had a class one day, we were setting up on the mouth of a river, and the day before we'd seen a sow with 3 cubs come down, and there were some male bears around. She didn't want to be around, so she had left. And that morning I took the group in before daylight, and we sat down on a grassy patch close to the edge of the river and started watching. And pretty soon, down came Mother. And the next thing we saw, a big male comes in, and that's Mom, the small one there. And she, like, used her nose sort of say, get out of here, get out of here, get out of here. Now, I'm going to replay this video in a minute, and I want you to watch the back end of the mother bear as this encounter is going on here for a little bit of biology. See Mom coming in. Now watch her back end during this whole thing. Do you see a long white thing hanging down there? Bears, like humans, get tapeworms. And that's a tapeworm hanging out of there. And so that makes it even a little bit harder to have to take care of your cubs because you got to provide food for another rider along the way. Well, let's switch a little bit to the fascinating behavior of the bears. When you've got a bear and it's mating season, those bears become the top rooster on the block. They strut their stuff. They lock their knees, and you'll see them whomp, 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 with knees locked as they go over and scratch the trees to let you know this is my area right here, and I'm looking for any of the females in the area. Let's watch that once more. Look for the locked legs. See them? Whomp, whomp, coming in there. Now, bears are really a fearful creature. You hear all these stories that would make you want to run and hide about the bears, but the bears are anything but fearless. They're scaredy cats. And you never know if you're a bear when that sound might be another bear bigger or something you don't understand, or you better just be fearful to be safe. And one day we had our group out there, and as we were watching this bear down below us, a thunderstorm moved in, and the bear's digging out there, and the thunderstorm starts moving in. The rain's coming down, and you'll see the flashes of lightning come through. Oh. Doesn't understand the rain. There's a lightning flash. And the storm's coming from behind us to the bear, so the bear is getting a little later than we are, but you can see its head come up with the lightning flash. There was some more lightning. And there's some more lightning. And now it hears that flash. What is it? What's happening here? I don't understand this. Bears are a very fearful creature of anything that's around them. And the bears learn to be fearful young in their lives. Sandhill crane in the foreground, and there's a cub of the year. Mom, protect me, Mom. Usually when bears react to people, it's not because they are this big fearless creatures, because they've been surprised and we've actually scared them. Now, feeding ecology is very interesting. Here we've got a bison that fell through the ice and during the winter, and the bear has got to get the bison out in order to have a chance to feed on it. And there's a full bison in there with a grizzly pulling the bison out of the stream, or out of the actual lake where it's gone through there. Nothing better than water-softened frozen bison at the end of the season. Well, some of the other things, here's the bear finishing up the job, getting the whole bison out of there. But bears feed on a host of things. They like small items too, such as tearing this log apart, and inside the log, whoop, 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 look, whoa, right there, right there. What has he got in his mouth? A little mouse that didn't make it. So whether the item is as big as a bison or small as a mouse, they're willing to put a lot of time into it in order to get supper. They also feed on white bark pine cones. Now the white bark pine is a cone kissing cousin to the pinyon pine. It's got a small edible pine nut in it, and you'd like it too. It's just like a pinyon pine. Here's a grizzly that's climbed up the tree to pull out a pinyon pine nut and feed on it. Right now, the grizzly bears were delisted in the northwestern part of the United States because we thought that we had done a good job on restoring their endangered populations. But the white bark pine, which is one of their prime foods, is in great danger. The warm temperatures, forest fires, insects are all doing a job on the white bark pine. And so the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service has relisted the grizzly bear because we can't be certain of the white bark pine's future over the next 50 years or so. They also eat little army cutworm moths, and high up above tree line in the boulder fields, we'll find the grizzlies up there. Some grizzlies come in the springtime, about the middle of June, before there are anything else going on up there in the alpine, and they'll start feeding on these cutworm moths that fly up from the alfalfa fields down on the Great Plains. And the moths spend their night down among the boulders, but since it's permafrost, permanently frozen ground, they can't go deep, and they're trapped once they climb under the boulders, so the grizzlies will come in and dig them out. Here we've got a mom and a cub digging away, but I want you to get an idea of the amount of energy expended and the work that she's willing to do right there to find a little moth that's less than an inch long. Watch this. And here's another bear in the moth fields. With one hand, watch it move the big rock. That's the size or probably the weight of maybe a small Volkswagen or so. Grizzlies also have to put up with competition from other animals. Coming in there is a coyote. This grizzly's come up on the den of the coyotes. There'll be another one coming in here. But the one I want you to watch is the dark-furred one over there. She's the alpha female coyote. And the coyotes get this grizzly running for all it's worth. Now that female's going to come in and roll that grizzly end for end. She comes charging in, grabs his right hind foot, and whomp, boom, thump. What could be worse than being rolled by a lowly coyote? Here, how about a bite out of your butt? Chomp. And she comes back there and spits it out. Front leg territorial scratch. Spits out a little bit more. Oh, those bears taste so bad. So even though you're the biggest king in the country that's supposed to be fearless, you've still got to put up with the competition, and the lowly coyote can make you run and look embarrassing. As can its cousin, the wolf. There's wolf 21, the lead wolf there, and the next wolf coming in is alpha female 42. Now alpha female 42 has been raising pups for the last month. She hasn't eaten anything but regurgitated food brought to her by the rest of the pack. And by golly, she's going out there. She wants a new steak dinner. She's going to charge out there and kill something. And she can't find something to kill, well, she'll scavenge something. And if it doesn't work to find something to scavenge, well, she'll just take it away from anything that gets in her way, like a grizzly. And the grizzly realizes 4 wolves outweigh 1 grizzly. It hightails out of there. But it goes up on the hill and thinks about it a minute and says, you know, I'm bigger than any one of those wolves. I'm just well, by golly, I'm just not going to put up with that. And the fight is on. Now, people tend to think, well, who would get in a fight with a grizzly? Well, a pack of wolves can do a job on a grizzly. In fact, the score right now is wolves have killed 4 grizzlies, grizzlies have killed 0 wolves. Now, of course, if you're going to get in a fight with somebody, you don't pick the biggest, meanest guy on the block, do you? You go after a smaller one, and granted, they've killed smaller grizzlies, but the key point here is you could make a species population go extinct without killing one adult if you go after the youngsters. Well, what I'm showing you here is the first minute of a 30-minute battle. And I'm going to show you the last minute of the battle here in a second. Okay, that's the first minute of the battle. Now let's take a look at the last minute. Now strategies have been formulated. For the wolves, the idea is to keep the bear spinning. And for 30 minutes, this grizzly bear has been spinning around in circles. While one wolf eats, the other one comes over and bites it in the back. And the wolves are quite capable of taking a good chunk of meat out of a grizzly. And so the grizzly has to be real careful. And with 4 wolves, it's an uneven battle. Ouch! Oh, that one hurt. Now, if you're the grizzly, you got to have a strategy. If you go out after one of the wolves out there, what you've got to do is you go after it. First thing you do is look to your left, look to your right, and then you got to sit down and protect your tail end. Well, I'm going to give it away. The wolves win this one, folks. The battle went on for 30 minutes. The grizzly left bleeding from its hindquarters. And the wolves sat down and they fed for 30 minutes. They feed until they're what we call meat drunk. Their bellies are distended. They've got so much food in them. And then another grizzly came in. And for about 5 minutes, the wolves hassled the other grizzly. And then it's as if it was, oh man, that's too much. Can't do this. Going to have to let that bear feed. And the next bear fed for 30 minutes on its own. So it kind of depends on who is the most motivated. If you're a mother grizzly with cubs to feed, you might drive the wolves off. But if you're a pack of wolves, the grizzlies likely get driven off. Well, that gives you a little bit of an idea of sort of the fascination we've got of bears. And some of the things I would like to share with you are those sightings that we just saw. If I could have you up in my neck of the woods in Yellowstone or up in the Arctic with the polar bears. And I hope you enjoyed those clips tonight. Perhaps now we ought to share a few stories about the bears and what goes on with bears themselves. The first story I want to share with you is one about good taste. Bears live from their stomach and they have good taste. Ben Mickelson's a friend of mine. He was on a spirit bear program with us on the British Columbia coast. And up there, there is a black bear that is white, the spirit bear. And they're fairly rare but fairly important to the native peoples. And we were visiting in a native village, and one of the native elders ended up inviting Ben to stay on. And so Ben just left our group and stayed with them for 6 months. When he came out, Ben wrote the book, Touching Spirit Bear, which is a motivational book for young people. Now, Ben has had a very intimate tie with a bear for somewhere nigh on to 30 years now. The bear was a cub and up in Montana, and some people found the cub, brought it into Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks, and said the mother abandoned it. Well, mothers don't abandon them. They'll leave them babysitting somewhere while they go out to feed, and then they come back. But by then, they couldn't return the cub, and so somebody had to take care of this cub. Montana Fish, Wildlife, and Parks accepted Ben's invitation, and Ben started taking care of the bear. Well, now what Ben did was he built a concrete cave onto the side of his house with an entrance into the cave, and the cave had an entrance into the house, and he started raising the bear. Well, bears are smart, folks, and they learn really pretty quickly. But even though they learn pretty quickly, being a bear, you're still a youngster once in your life, right? And Ben is the name that is also given to the bear there. Ben, there were some trying times as Ben was growing up. And Ben Mickelson, Ben, was, well, it was early in his marriage, let's just put it that way. And things sometimes get a little stressed at that point. And his wife was getting a little bit irritated with the bear. And there'd been a few words had about this, and it was decided that the bear was on a short leash. When Ben comes home one night, drives in and looks in the house, and the house is trashed. The bear has been all over everything. So Ben starts cleaning up. He's cleaning up as fast as he can go. He's cleaning up everything he can. The bathroom is horrible. He goes in there and he starts cleaning up. Now see, the bear knows the rules. The bear can come into the house. If he's wet, not allowed to come into the living room, can stay in the bathroom, and the bear can turn on the water in the tub, but once it gets wet, can't come into the bathroom. If it's dry, or it can't come into the living room. If it's dry, he can come into the living room. So the bear now knows the rules, but at that time wasn't totally good because he was a young teenager. And Ben's just cleaning away, and just as he hears his wife's cars hit the driveway, he finishes up. He runs in. He sets down the living room, pops up the paper, and in she walks. Says, well, how did the bear do today? And Ben says, well, did pretty good. There was really no problems with him. And somewhere along the line, this bear gets, the name changes to Buffy, so we'll call him Buffy for now. Buffy did well. There was no real problems with Buffy. Everything's okay. And his wife disappears in the kitchen. About 5 minutes later, she comes out and she says, well, if Buffy did so well, what's the toothpaste doing on the ceiling in the bathroom? It seems that if a bear steps on a tube of toothpaste, the other end has got to go somewhere, folks. Well, which facts concerning Ben I merely tell you so that you'll understand the fact that Buffy does have good taste. One day, there was an invitation from the neighbors to join him for a barbecue, and Ben said, well, what are we going to barbecue? And the neighbor said, well, we'll bring the barbecue dish. You can just barbecue it up. And Ben agreed to that. And the neighbor said, we're going to bring tofu. Well, Ben had to allow the fact that he'd never eaten tofu and didn't quite know what it was, and kind of heard some things about tofu. But the neighbors convinced him on the phone, and Ben agreed if Buffy would eat the tofu, Ben would eat the tofu. Well, the appointed time arrives, and unwalk the neighbors, and they've got a tinfoil package about that big around, squarish, and about that tall. In fact, they had two of the packages. And they give them to Ben, and Ben pulls the tinfoil off, and that tofu kind of flutters. You know how tofu, yeah. Okay, the tofu's fluttering, and Ben advances on Buffy. Buffy, thinking he's getting a treat, comes in and chomp! For 5 minutes with his tongue, trying to get it out of his teeth. At which point, Buffy backs off, growling at Ben. Now, over the course of this relationship between Ben and Buffy, Buffy has not really growled at Ben much, but he did that night. Now, I don't know what was in Ben's mind, but Ben takes the rest of the tofu and advances on Buffy again. Buffy's standing there, weight evenly balanced on all 4 feet, looking as Ben extends his hand with the tofu. He's balanced on all 4 feet. Ben said it happened so quick that if he hadn't been able to see the evidence afterwards, he wouldn't have believed it had even happened. But Buffy comes off 1 foot, hits the tofu, smashes off the wall 10 feet away, and is backing away, growling at Ben before Ben knows the tofu's all over the side of the wall. You see, folks, bears have good taste, and that tells you something about tofu. Well, everybody wants to know, you're up in grizzly country a lot of the time, you're out with a lot of bears, you ever been in real dangerous situations? And, you know, real dangerous situations, they happen about 1/100th of 1% of the time, and it's usually because we make a mistake and surprise a bear, so I usually don't share too many stories about them, but I think I'll share 1 or 2 tonight. The scariest one of all I had was up on the side of Mount Washburn, a steep mountain where the road is cut down and there's a cut like that and then it goes on down. It was very narrow. This was in the 70s. And there was a parking spot big enough for about 2 vehicles, and I'd stop there with my 15-passenger van and my class and got everybody out. And this was before the fires of '88 burned through there. And looking down 200 feet below us was a beautiful aspen forest. And as we got there and started to look, here came a small herd of elk, cow elk, and their little ones around the corner. And we looked, and coming over 200 feet below us from the other side comes a grizzly with 2 cubs of the year. Now, in June, 2 cubs of the year, even 1 cub of the year, I guess you should say, cub of the year only comes up about that tall on your leg, right? Okay, so here comes Mom. She sees the elk. She charges over and grabs an elk calf, and boom, it's dead, just like that. She drags it into the tree. Well, the elk are upset. They charge her cubs, and they try to stomp the bear cubs to death. And the bear cubs turn and they run, and they're coming right up the hill. And I can see they're going to be pretty close to us. And I'm pushing my students back towards the van. Those bear cubs hit the road no more than 100 feet from us. They turn and they look at us. Their eyes are as big as silver dollars, and they're staring and they're scared. They look at us, they look ahead, and they go right on up the hill past us and head up the hill. And my students are, wow, Jim, this is incredible. First we get to see a grizzly bear predation event on an elk, and then the cubs come right up here beside us. And I look down, and Mom comes out of the aspen. There's blood dripping from her jowls. She sniffs the air, and she looks, and there's no cub. She runs left, she runs right, she runs left. She hits the scent trail and starts up, and I can tell she's going to be a lot closer to us now than the cubs were. And by then, that parking lot big enough for 2 cars now has about 6 cars in it, and I'm pushing my people back, and we're all crammed in there, and she hits that road about 25 feet from us. Her front feet hit the road, she turns, she looks every human straight in the eye, blood dripping from her jowls, and I figure somebody's had it now. She looks at each of us, turns and heads right on up the hill past us. Right after her cubs, following that scent trail. My students are, wow, Jim, this is incredible. We get to see a predation event. The cubs are right here, and Mom comes charging right down here, and I hear, whomp, whomp, whomp. And I look, and the width of that road away from us, and you to this day can go up there and look at how wide that road is. It's been widened a little, and it still ain't wide, folks. She's just come off the uphill side, hit the road, and the 2 cubs are beside her, and the width of the road away are all of us standing there. And behind us are the cars. And on the other side of that is her elk calf. And I know somebody's had it at this point. She charges right into the group just like Moses parting the water. They flow to both sides. She goes between the people, between the cars, and right down the hill. I look up, and here come the cubs between the people, between the cars, and right down the hill. And my students are, wow, Jim, this is incredible. First a predation event. Then the mom comes by, the cubs by, and then the right here on the road was, what's next? And I said, we're going back to camp. One more real danger one real quick here. 1971, I opened up the park for overnight visitation. I had the only concession for winter cross-country skiing, snowshoeing in the park. And that winter I spent about 130 days on skis, and it was the 23rd of March, last day, we were closing down. At the end of the day, the last snow coach out with the people I was going with, and I was heading for Canyonlands and warm country. And so that coach arrived early that morning, and out got 2 little Southern Belles. Now, these were the classic Southern Belles, you know, with the long eyelashes and a voice that would just melt the heart of a 22-year-old lad. And they wanted to go skiing, but I wanted to tear the shop down, but well, let's simplify the story. They convinced me to take them skiing. And we hopped in the snow coach. We went to Hayden Valley. Hayden Valley was the home of the grizzly bear research at that time, and 2 very famous researchers, the Craighead brothers, Frank and John. And that was the heart of our grizzly research. And so that day, 23rd of March, we hit the snow and we started skiing across it. The valley's basically flat. As you start up the hills on the side, you get these big spreading conifers with big spreading branches. And we're out there in the middle, and I look over my shoulder, and there comes a grizzly. One of the first ones out of hibernation. It wasn't a big grizzly. It probably went 350 or something like that. Not really big, but a grizzly nonetheless. And it sees us, we see it, it turns and starts to come to us. So I tell these 2 gals, turn and head for the trees. We head for the trees, I look over my shoulder. The bear's heading for the trees. I say, let's go a little faster. We go a little faster, I look over my shoulder. The bear's coming a little faster. I say, let's go a lot faster. We go a lot faster, and the bear breaks into a slow gallop. Well, there's no question, we'll get to these trees before that bear does. So we get to the trees, and I look over my shoulder, but the bear is still coming. So what do we do now? Well, I quickly, these are paying clients. I quickly got down, unbuckled their skis, grabbed hold of them, lifted the two of them up in this tree, up on the branches as far as I could go, and I look over the shoulder, and here's the bear coming. And I know there's not time to take my skis off. I grab the branch and pull up, and I got about in this position. I'm just starting to pull my legs up, and I hear crunch. And I look down between my legs, and the bear has got his teeth sunk in the rubber of my boot and the wood in my ski. And he's got this stupid look on his face. I caught it. Now what do I do? And in fairness, I probably had a stupid look too. And we stared at each other for a minute, and then very gently, he starts to pull back. Well, when he did, I panicked and I jerked on my foot, which I probably shouldn't have done. But he didn't know what he was going to do with it, but he wasn't going to lose it. When I tried to pull it away, he started pulling back. And he's pulling, and I realized I'm in trouble. So I dropped down, got the branch under my armpits, wrapped my arm around the tree like this, and I really had a good hold. But he starts pulling more and more. My underwear are no longer the same color here. And I yell at these two women to do something, and they start bawling. The more they cry, the more upset the bear gets. The more upset the bear gets, the harder he pulls on me. He's pulling and pulling, and this ain't good. So one of the ladies, the closest one to him, realizes she's the one that has to do something. And she reaches up, and she breaks off a branch, and she leans down to where she's about 6 feet from the nose of this bear, and she whacks it down across his nose. And he growls a little, jumps back, and almost lets go. So she tries again, and almost lets go. So she breaks off this branch, about 30 inches long, probably about just about an inch in diameter. I mean, it took every ounce of her strength to break it off. She leaned over, she locked her knee on this branch, and she leans down. She's within 3 feet of the nose of that bear. She came down on the nose of that bear with every ounce that she had in her body, and right across his nose. That bear let out the most guttural, earth-shaking growl I've ever felt. It came up my leg, past my testicles, past my heart, and it reared back, popped me up, took all the skin off my arms. I managed to grab the branch, and now I'm stretched out like this. And the bear's pulling for all it's worth. He's pulling. You ever played tug of war with a dog over a bone? Yeah, well, the problem's I'm the bone. And he's got me stretched out there. I mean, I'm really stretched out like this, and I decided there's only one thing to do. I'm going to let go, and I'm going to try to turn. When I let go, I'm going to jam my ski and my boot as deep into his mouth as I can, so hopefully he can't close it. I'm stretched out here. That bear's pulling on my leg, just like I'm pulling on your legs right now. Well, if I haven't created too much of a credibility gap, we might change to another type of story. The Native Americans have many stories that they share with us, and one of my mentors in those stories is Jim Gary. Jim has worked as curator of mythology at the Smithsonian, and he specializes in the oral traditions of the bears. And there's a lot of neat stories there. I'm going to share one with you tonight. But let's think a little bit about oral traditions and what we learned as European people arriving in the homes of the Native Americans. When we arrived, they had an oral tradition. And the oral tradition typically, when a little kid was small, you'd tell them a story, and maybe the purpose of that story was a little more boogeyman-like. You don't do this, you'll get in trouble, the boogeyman will eat you, that sort of thing. As they got older, you might tell them the same story, but now the structure in the story had got more complex to deal with the maturity of the child. And by the time that child gets up there and perhaps they're reaching puberty, the moral issues in the story are a lot stronger, and these are lessons to take home. So there's sort of about 3 levels of stories, and when us European people arrived, the Native Americans, they looked at us who didn't understand their language and so on. They said, yeah, those guys, we better just tell them the simple version of the story now because they aren't going to understand it. And it took a long time before we advanced, at least on some stories, up to that 3rd level. And there's even a 4th level that I'll tell you about in a little bit. But many of the stories we got seemed like they were very simple. But as you got older, got into a more complex, there was a lot more moral issues and things behind the stories. And the story I'm going to share to you tonight is a very interesting one because if you travel the native peoples of North America, almost every single tribe tells this story. But interestingly, if you go to China, to Scandinavia, to Russia, all those people have the same story. Now think about it for a minute. If we've got the same story told on both sides of the ocean, what's that tell us about the age of the story? It's old. In fact, it has to have come across when there was still a Bering land bridge. It's at least 12,000 years old. For various reasons that I can tell you about later if you're interested, we figure this story is about 25,000 years old. This is our oldest piece of oral tradition that we as a people have. And it's probably 25,000 years old. The story is called the Bear Mother story. And it tells about what happened when us naked apes came out of Africa. We didn't know what we were doing. And as we came north, we ran into things we'd never seen before, one of which was snow and another of which was great cold. And so as we came north, we didn't know, and we had to have a teacher. And these are the key elements of the story. And the teacher, in almost all cultures, is the bear mother. When we study where the Native American pharmacopoeias come from, where they got their drugs, the teacher was the bear mother. We were taught by the bears. If you go down into the Nesias, Polynesia, Micronesia, the teacher down there, the story's the same. We didn't know we had to be taught, but the teacher's the shark mother. But here it's the bear mother. And so I'd like to share a bit with you on the bear mother tonight. It all happened one winter, in fact, the first winter, and things weren't quite, they hadn't taken their form yet. The animals didn't necessarily have their form. Time was very different. A minute was much, much, much longer than it is today, let alone how long was a day. And it was at the end of winter. It was spring, but not the spring you think of, like I've been seeing here the last few days, with beautiful flowers and great smells. It was the spring of the mountains, and the spring of the mountains is when much of the snow melts into puddles of water that are full of floating ice. It's sloppy wet wherever you go, and it's cold, and there's no fruit out there, no berries, except those that are left on the bushes that no bird or no animal has picked during the winter. They're more like a piece of cardboard, and you don't really want to eat them now. And it was one of those spring mornings when this young maiden was out there, and she was working away, picking the berries off the bush and thinking about things. She knew if she worked very hard that morning, and everybody else in the tribe worked very hard that morning, that there'd probably be enough food for them to all have some supper that night. And so she was working that morning. A shadow passed over, and she looked up to see the most handsome, the most stalwart, drop-dead, knock-your-socks-off man she had ever seen in her life. He wore the finest clothes. The stitching was great on the seams of his clothes. His quiver was hand-tooled leather. The fetching on his arrows was outstanding. And he had a smile that could make the sun rise in the east. And she was immediately impressed. And he walked up and spoke to her. He explained that he had been watching her for several days and was very impressed with her, and he would like her to become his wife. Well, the young maiden knew she had duties to the tribe, but she probably was also pretty darn smart. Probably didn't take her more than a couple minutes to say yes. And then he explained she would have to go with him far to the north to meet his people. And this puzzled her because she knew her people were the farthest north out of Africa that anybody had ever come. And how could there be somebody farther north? But he convinced her, and they started walking. And they walked all day long. And remember, time hasn't taken its form, so this was a long walk that day as they went to the north. And finally, as they crested this big ridge, off in the west, the sun was about to set, she looked down, and there was a village. And in that village were lodges, but each lodge was bigger than her whole village put together. And round it were a magnificent people. The women stood head and shoulders taller than the biggest brave in her village. The men were much taller than the women, and they were all handsome and beautiful people. She'd never seen a people like this, and dressed as exquisitely as they were, and she was immediately impressed. Well, he took her down and started introducing her to the people, and explained that she was his bride-to-be. And the dark started to come on for the evening. It was time to go into the lodges. And as they started for the lodge, he pulled her aside, and he said to her, "When you go in the lodge, you must be very brave. You can trust me, you are with me, and everything will be okay." She didn't understand why, but she said okay, and they pulled across the animal skin from the opening, and they looked in, and down the center of the lodge was a row of hearth fires, and on each one was a big pot boiling, and there were tremendous odors coming out of a magnificent feast for the night, and she was very impressed because in her young age, at that time of the year, she'd been lucky if she got supper at night, let alone a feast that she was looking at. And she stepped into the lodge, and as she stepped into the lodge, she started to get more comfortable, and she looked up, and on the sides of the lodge, there were shadows dancing from the fire, casting lights over the people. And she looked at the shadows, she realized they were grizzly bears. And that startled her. And she looked down, and it wasn't people there, it was grizzly bears. And she looked to one corner, and there was a grizzly taking off his grizzly skin and revealing a human. And she was very scared. She started to back away. Her husband stopped her and explained, no, that this was his people, and his people were shapeshifters. They could be in the form of humans during the daytime, the form of bears at the night, but she was all right there. She was one of them. She was a guest. And she accepted that, and that night was, oh man, was it a feast that night. But she was tired. It had been a long day, and she told her husband-to-be that she would like to go to bed, and he put her into one of the finest beds she'd ever been in, thick animal skins below and above her, and she snuggled down, smelling what she smelt, which was lots of food still there. And she realized that come morning, she would have something she had never had in her young life, breakfast. There'd never been enough food in the spring for breakfast. And she went to sleep. In the morning she awoke, she smelled the good food, she couldn't believe what was going on. She literally had to pinch herself to prove this was right, but it was right. And she got up, she ate breakfast, she joined her husband-to-be, and he explained to her that that day she would have to go with the women of the village, and the women of the village would teach her the songs of the plants. Now the songs of the plants are the songs that tell you which plant you use the soap to wash your hair, which one you get the fine fibers to make the thread, and which ones have the coarse fibers to make the ropes, which ones you boil 3 times, throwing the water out 3 times before you can eat the plant, or it will poison you. But more importantly, the songs of the plants are our thank you to the plants for giving up their lives that we may live, and that as this group here, that we may live north in the colder regions. And that day she went with the people, the women, and she learned the songs of the plants. And she was smart, and she realized that her life would never be the same knowing these songs, that she would be much better off. The next morning, her husband-to-be sent her with the men to learn the songs of the animals. These are the songs that tell you how to harvest the deer, where to find the deer, how to harvest the cougars so that you won't be hurt. But more importantly, these are the songs that tell the animals thank you for giving up their life so that we humans may be here. And it was a great summer. She traveled with the women and learned more songs. She traveled with the men and learned more songs. And after a great summer, as the first flakes of snow were falling in the fall, she grew lonely, and she went to her husband-to-be and explained she would like to visit her people one more time before the snow stopped her from traveling there. And he agreed, but he explained to her that he believed she should spend the winter with her own people. And if she came back in the spring, and if she still loved him, then they could be married. And she said okay to this. So the bear people outfitted her with all sorts of gifts, magnificent gifts to take back. And as she was ready to leave, her husband-to-be pulled her aside and said, you may go back to your people, but you must promise me 2 things. You may share all the songs, but you may not tell your people where you learned the songs or where my people live. And she agreed, and she went back to her people. And after that long, long walk, she came into the village. Her tribe was astounded. This maiden had disappeared in the spring. They knew she was dead, but she was returning with rich gifts for everybody. She was finely dressed. And there was a great party that night at the return of the young maiden. But they didn't realize the greatest gift of all till morning. And in the morning, she started to teach them the songs. These people were smart. They realized that knowing these songs, their life would never be the same again, that it would be easier, that they would have breakfast in the morning in the springtime. They would have better clothing. They they would have better ways. They were learning from the bear, but they didn't know it. And it was an incredible winter. They placed her up on a pedestal, and we all like that sort of thing, to be looked up to. And she was the one on the pedestal for the village. She was the source, the wealth of knowledge. And that's the way it went. One incredible winter. But come springtime, what happened was she grew lonely for that man, and she decided that she would like to marry him. So after the snow had melted, the ground had dried, she packed her pack and she headed north, that long journey north. And finally she crested the ridge, and down below the ridge was the village. And she went back and she was welcomed in, and it was a great rejoicing that morning, for the bride-to-be had returned. And it was a great summer. More songs of plants, more songs of animals. And in the fall, she told her husband-to-be that she would like to be married. And he said this wouldn't be possible, because she had yet to learn all the songs. And most importantly, she had not learned the song that allows the bear to go underground and to stay there all winter, and to emerge in the spring without muscle loss, without damage from sleeping all that time. And she would have to return to her people one more time. Well, she didn't really like this, but that was the situation. She understood that she couldn't sleep all winter. And so they outfitted her with gifts again. And she made the long journey back, and she got back to her people. Only things had changed now when she came back. This was a different winter. No longer were the people satisfied with the songs. They have a curiosity, like all of us. They wanted to know where the songs came from, and she'd promised she couldn't tell them. And so they started trying to trick her. They tried to badger her. She was no longer on the pedestal. She was hounded day and night. And the only way she could keep her people quiet was to sing the songs from dawn to dusk. Now this, where the winter before had been so great, was the winter from hell. She was not happy. Her people were no longer her people. She realized that she would have to leave. And in the spring, before the snow was off, when it was more water and slush than snow, she grabbed her pack one morning and left. She did that long hike. She got to the ridge. She looked down, and there were the bear people. And she went down, and they welcomed her back. They all trusted her. They didn't even ask if she'd told. And it was evening that evening, and there's where our story could end. Except for one thing. As she started to go in, one old bear person outside started taking off his bear skin. And as he took his bear skin off, there were 3 sets of eyes on the ridge. See, her people had decided if she wouldn't tell, that they would have the 3 most powerful braves follow her and find out the secret of where she went each summer. Well, it turned out the 3 most powerful, biggest braves in the village were her brothers. And they had been laying on top that ridge watching her the whole time. And what they saw was the bear person take his skin off. And they were horrified. They were petrified. They had already realized that in that village, the women stood a head and shoulders taller than they were, let alone the men. And they decided this is a people you might not want to get mad at you because you'd followed her back to the village. And they'd already decided they were going to return to their own people and tell their own people that their sister had found a very wealthy, very strong tribe to the north, but that tribe liked their privacy and they'd better leave them alone. But suddenly they saw black magic, so to speak. This was a shapeshifter. Everything that they could think of was wrong in their minds went on, and they didn't know what to do. They started trembling. They started sweating as they lay there. And their sister went into the lodge. And they laid there to the middle of the night, a point when even the watchdogs are sleeping. And they hatched a plan. And they crept down that ridge, and they pulled out their knives, and they went bed to bed. At every bear they found, they slit their throats. And as they came to their sister's bed, they found her in bed with a grizzly bear. This was the first night she had slept with the grizzly. Before that, he had kept his human skin on all nights. But she'd told him that night that she loved him not for what he looked like, but for who he was, and that he should keep his bear skin on that night. And that night, she slept, woman with bear, bear with woman, for the first time. And the brothers creeped up. They grabbed the grizzly and slit his throat. She awoke to something, and her husband pulled her close, gurgling to death in his own blood. He managed to whisper one word in her ear and died in her arms. She was immediately heartbroken, horrified. The brothers grabbed her and explained they were saving her from these bear people, these bewitched people, and they grabbed her and they drug her, kicking and screaming out, and back to the village. Well, the young maiden, she was totally devastated. Her chosen people had all been slaughtered right there in front of her. She didn't know what to do, what to say. As she got back to the village, it was no longer her people. She wanted nothing to do with them, and they didn't want anything to do with her because they weren't sure what had gone on up there. And so she got a teepee in the back of the village, a decrepit teepee where she stayed. And here, too, our story could end tonight. Except 9 months to the day of the slaughter, she gave birth to the bear sons. Now, the bear sons were interesting. The bear sons were shapeshifters. The bear sons could be bear, they could be person. And when in the form of a bear, they had the wisdom of the 10 wisest people in the village. And when in the form of a human, they had the strength of 10 grizzly bears. And the bear sons weren't very well accepted by the other kids, because who wants to play with a kid that has 10 times the strength of a grizzly bear? And the bear mother wasn't accepted, so they were outcasts at the back of the village. Now, the bear sons grew in bear years. When we humans think of a year, the bear sons grew about 4 years. And 4 years after she gave birth, the bear sons were reaching manhood. She called him into her teepee one night, and that night she explained to the bear sons what had happened, what we people had done to their father. Now, the young maiden that we knew at the beginning of the story, which is about 6 years have passed now in our story, was now a decrepit, old, broken hag. Because a broken heart will do that to a person. Her life was basically gone for her. Now, the interesting thing about oral tradition is the end of one story is the beginning of another story. And all the great oral traditions go on to another story with one exception. The bear mother died that night. You can visit all the tribes, all the natives on both sides of the ocean. There are no more bear mother stories. That was the end of the bear mother. But the bear sons, they went on. They traveled to the four corners of the world, so to speak. They traveled to every continent. They traveled to every country. They looked for good people, and to the good people, they shared the songs of the plants, the songs of the animals. The bear sons became the heroes of all of our traditions, folks. They sat at the table with King Arthur. They slew the dragons. They were the heroes of all the continents, where they looked for good people to share the songs of the plants and the animals. They also shared the one word the bear father whispered that night. And I'm going to share it with you tonight. That one word has a very powerful background to it. That one word is remember. There's several things you should take home from this story that you should remember. One is remember, the wilderness is still dangerous to us because she never learned all the songs. There are still plants out there and animals out there that will kill you. Remember also that every bear cub, from the time it is that big, learns the story of the bear mother and the bear father and what we people did to the bear father. And when you're in the home of the bear, their country, walk softly and be respectful that you're in their home, because some of those bears still have not forgiven people for what we did. Remember too, folks, we're on a solitary spaceship and we're using it up mighty fast. We don't seem to have space for bears anymore. We don't have room to live with the bears. And I propose to you that if we can learn to live with the bears, we can give the bears a place to live, we can give the bears wilderness, a place to roam, a place to roar. Perhaps if we can live with those bears, we will live on planet Earth. Tonight I'm preaching to the choir, but remember, it's your job now to take care of this planet. And I told you there were 4 stories, 4 levels to oral tradition. The 4th story is when you become part of the story. I give you tonight the story of the bear mother. It's your story to share. I want you to share it with someone else. But you're not going to understand it the first time you share it, perhaps not the second or the third, but at some point you will be that story. And remember then, as that story, it's up to you to take care of the bears in the planet Earth. Thank you. Question? I hope you've had some fun with the bears tonight. And Louise is shaking her head, yes, we got time for a couple of questions? Oh, as many as I want. So anybody got some questions we can play with? Quiet audience, nobody going to ask one. Louise, you're my placed one. Hey, I think there's only one question per customer. I heard at least a dozen in there. Okay, the question I heard was, what about the conservation of bears? That was staged at the world level, I think. Then she said, what's the politics and conservation of grizzlies? We had some people mauled and killed by grizzlies last summer in Yellowstone. There were a lot of questions in that. I think you got more in your share there. Okay, worldwide, we have 8 species of bears, if you call the panda a bear, and we can argue that taxonomic question if you want to sometime, but for me, the panda's a bear. So we'll let it be a bear, the 8th species of bear. 7 of those species are in deep trouble, folks. Possibly the only one that in 50 years from now might exist even outside zoos is the black bear of America. All the other bears are in deep trouble. They need every bit of help that we can give them. Even our grizzly, we just put back on the endangered species list. And it troubles me greatly when the Department of Agriculture tells the Forest Service to write their 10-year plan, and it tells them to write their 10-year plan with a 90% probability that we will have grizzly bears left in 100 years. Now, wait a minute. Why don't you tell them to write it with a 100% probability? And the question is, the grizzly's doing well today. 20 years from now, probably still be doing good. By the time we hit 50 and 100, I don't know, and it worries me a lot. There's a lot of politics with our growing populations, our growing needs for running pipelines through bear country in Canada. This is part of what I said, if we can live with the bear, we might live with ourselves, so we better do a lot of conservation living with that bear. Last summer was a particularly hard year for us in Yellowstone. We had 3 maulings. 2 people were killed. Some of it was just pure bad luck. The first gentleman killed was bit once on the leg, and the canine went through the femur, and he bled to death. If it had been a quarter inch either way, he'd had a story to tell, and that had been all there would have been to it. But we do have more bears now than we used to, and many more visitors than we used to, and encounters will occur. The best way to handle that is good education, travel in groups, behave with all the rules of bear country, and become educated before you go into bear country. I see bears 11 months out of the year in grizzlies, and we don't have problems with them because we live by their rules, and we remember that every bear learns when they're young about people. I don't have any great fears of the bears. We have 3 million plus visitors a year to Yellowstone, and very rarely do we have a contact-made encounter between bears and people. So it's really a rare thing. What's not rare is once it happens, it hits the newspapers all over the country, and it's great fodder for newspaper stories and so on, and then everybody thinks, oh, this happens all the time. Nah, it doesn't happen all the time. And we're around bears a lot, and bears are pretty good-tempered. I think they kind of see humans with a funny light. You know, what are those crazy humans doing? So that's kind of just a little bit of rambling since it was a long question that I got there. I'm not sure of any specifics that I can go to more than that. Anybody else got a question? Yes. If you encounter a bear, how can you avoid it? Well, first off, you want to let a bear know ahead of time you're coming. So you make noises. If you can't see, like we're going into a lot of willows, you would maybe sing. The human voice is pretty offensive to a bear. They don't like to hear that. But you don't surprise them. That's the key thing. And if you encounter them, you never run. You don't turn your back on them. And in general, you'll walk away slowly. Now, if they bother you, you might have to lay down on the ground and play dead. And there's rules for how we do all those sorts of things. But for the most part, you let them know beforehand you're coming with noise. Other questions? Yes? The question is about population dynamics of the wolf populations in Yellowstone, and I'm going to use Yellowstone here as a term for the greater Yellowstone ecosystem. Yellowstone National Park is really a small little portion of that. It's 3,400 miles, surrounded by 13 other federal, state, and tribal units of land management encompassing 23,000 square miles. And in that area right now, we've probably got, I don't have the latest figures in my head, only 400 wolves. And if you look at the full 3 introductions areas, the greater Yellowstone ecosystem, the Idaho ecosystem, and the northern ecosystem, our total number of bears is only 2,000 in all the states of Idaho, Montana, and Wyoming. The Fish and Wildlife Service did not want to cut that down. And the job of the Endangered Species Act is to take a species in trouble, take all the might of the federal government and lift it up until it can survive on its own in perpetuity. Then we delist, in other words, we give management to the states. So when we got up to that number, pushing around 2,000 wolves this year, the Fish and Wildlife Service wants to turn management over to the states, which is what our Endangered Species Act is about, delisting. But the states have to do it well. And each of the states has guaranteed to maintain a certain number of wolves. For some of the pro-wolf community, that number is lower than they would like. For the managers, the number maintained meets our genetic goals. Our genetic goals say we need about 45 packs and a total of 450 wolves. Now we've got over 100 breeding packs and around 2,000 wolves. So the states are saying we have to control the number of wolves, and all the states have or will have instigated hunting seasons. And I'm as pro-wolf as anybody comes. I've been in the battle testifying since the 80s to bring wolves in. I've written numerous books on wolves, but as a pro-wolf person, I realize it's my responsibility now to step up to the plate and help control the number, because we can't have wolves going into Bozeman, for instance. And we've already had wolves there. And if we have wolves in there, somebody's going to get bit sometime, and that's going to be bad for all of them. So we have to control the wolves. And hunting is one of the, if not the strongest tool we have across the states to do the hunting. So I am myself pro-hunting the wolves and maintaining the number at a level that's politically acceptable, because biologically wolves can increase faster than we've got land where we can support them and keep them out of trouble. The gene pool of bears, of other rare animals, and wolves is mighty precarious. And through our efforts on an international basis of zoos, registries among zoos, breeding lines so we can follow the genealogy of the animals, zoos have a very important role in maintaining that gene pool. I hate to say it very much so, but there will be people sitting in this room that will see the day that certain species of bears only live in zoos. And the zoo is a critical element that we have to have, although certainly I wished we didn't have to have it. And it's not just bears or wolves. There's a lot of animals that are in that strait. You know, I haven't even got into cats tonight. We could go that whole route too of the cats that are in trouble. We need zoos, bottom line. Yeah.
I read that due to global warming, the polar bear was trying to evolve back into the grizzly or the black. You agree with that?
Question is, with global warming, might over time the grizzly or the polar bear evolve back to the brown bear status? Polar bears are derived from brown bears, and global warming is happening so fast that the polar bears are not going to really have time to make that sort of change. I run high Arctic programs each year. If anybody'd like to join me in the high Arctic next year, we will be up around Ellesmere, Greenland. I've still got a few openings on those trips. And we see the warming at an unprecedented rate. This is my 22nd year running polar bear programs. 20% of the bears have been lost in the area I work since we started. So it's happening too fast to change back. Within the lifetime of most of us here, polar bears may go down to 25% of what they are now, but I believe some will probably survive on shore for some period into the future, 100 years. I don't know how warm the planet will get. If we ever get to the point where there's no ice in the polar basin, I don't think we'll have any polar bears, and I don't know if that will happen. But there isn't time for them to go back. They are going to be white bears up there that live on seals for the next 50 to 100 years, and that's when we're going to lose the ice. Last summer, my ecotourism expedition set the record for farthest north of any ecotourism trip ever. And not because we did anything spectacular ourselves, it's because the ice melted out so fast and so thoroughly that we could get up there. And the bears aren't going to do well with it. Question was, will a polar bear interbreed with the brown bear, or to what extent? A few years ago, a gentleman shot and killed a bear and discovered that it was a hybrid between a polar bear and a brown bear. This is not the first time we've known of. There have been quite a few of those through the years. In fact, clear back to 1917, in a book that classified all the bears, had one bear so strange they didn't know what to do with, and that was probably a hybrid. So this is not that new to us. Will we see more of it? We might, if we got to a point that polar bears were very low in number. But I think there's still elements that will keep most of that interbreeding from going on. It can happen. They can do it. Any other questions? Yes, ma'am. That picture is a spirit bear. The spirit bear is a white-black bear. If you put a dot in the middle of central British Columbia and come out at 8 o'clock on a line and go up at 11 o'clock on the line, everywhere in British Columbia inside that, on the coast and out on the island, has spirit bears in different numbers. Central British Columbia, I've found about 1 in 40. Along the coast, sometimes as high as 1 in 4. And I've been on one island out there where I saw only 7 bears, 4 of which were spirit bears. The spirit bear is very special to the natives, as you might imagine, but I throw that picture in because that's a spirit bear in the dump in one of the Canadian towns, and I think it's a tragedy we don't want to see, and I want you to remember that we got to do better. Sounds like we got a quiet crew there.